The assembly chambers on Djoser Prime loomed with quiet grandeur, a vast dome built to hold the universe's most powerful leaders. High above, crystalline chandeliers shimmered, casting alien hues across the walls and polished floors. Lieutenant Commander Chris Anderson entered, his steps echoing, and an air of uneasy silence followed him as he strode through the center aisle. His gaze was cold, piercing, his face set in an impenetrable mask. Dressed in the formal but stark uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, he looked every bit the soldier turned ambassador, carrying a weight of resolve that filled the room. Across the chamber, alien representatives of every major civilization in the galaxy sat in tense, anticipatory silence. Some fidgeted, others barely dared to glance his way. At the center of the long diplomatic table stood Chancellor Boonmer, a prominent figure within the Galactic Union and representative of the Ozone Collective. His amphibious features, smooth and blue-tinged, gave him an appearance of calmness, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of wariness. Boonmer was known as a master negotiator, his species revered for their intellectual prowess and their dedication to peacekeeping across interstellar borders. Today, however, he found himself wondering whether his skills would suffice. "Welcome, Lieutenant Commander Anderson, representative of Earth," Boonmer intoned, his voice smooth and carefully measured. "We are honored to have you join us on this momentous day, as we prepare to formally integrate the Terran Empire into our union of civilizations." Chris's gaze did not falter. He made no bow or nod. The silence stretched, growing heavy, as if his very presence defied the need for diplomatic pleasantries. A slight frown creased Boonmer's brow, but he quickly resumed his official stance, choosing not to press the human ambassador any further. "Today marks a historic moment," Boonmer continued, gesturing to a thick, official-looking document bound in interwoven metals and etched with the symbols of the Union's member civilizations. "This treaty has been meticulously crafted over years of negotiations. With your signature, Lieutenant Commander, humanity will join us as an ally and equal, bound to the shared laws and mutual protections of the Union." Boonmer lifted the treaty, signing his name in an elegant, practiced motion. With an unreadable look, he slid it down the table to the next representative, an ambassador from the Raxum Dominion, who signed his name with a begrudging nod to the human. The document continued down the line, each alien ambassador pausing only briefly, as if afraid to linger too long on the matter of Earth's entrance. Some added terse remarks. For the sake of peace, one muttered, while another whispered, "May it temper them." Other representatives simply scribbled their assent, casting wary glances at Chris as they passed it on. At last, the treaty landed in front of General Yakrin, representative of the Skrullians, a tall, lean figure covered in dark scales that glinted in the chamber's dim light. Yakrin's amber eyes burned with contempt as he glared at the treaty, and with a sharp, hissing breath, he seized the document and threw it onto the floor, his clawed hand trembling in outrage. "Are we truly expected to allow these barbarians to sit among us?" he snarled, his voice echoing with fury. His gaze flickered to Chris, who stood like a statue, unmoved by the Skrullians' display. Chancellor Boonmer lifted his hands in a placating gesture. "General Yakrin, please. We have already reached." "No!" Yakrin snapped, casting an accusing glare around the table. "You may have agreed, but none of you suffered as my people have suffered. 24 of our nursery worlds, innocent, fertile planets, destroyed by these human war machines. Countless generations of our young wiped out before they even had a chance to breathe." Chris's voice cut through the room like a blade, cold and uncompromising. "You attacked our home." The room fell silent, a silence that seemed to choke the air. Yakrin sneered, his reptilian lips curling back to reveal razor-sharp fangs. "A few 100,000 human lives at most," he spat. "And in return, you annihilated entire planets. You slaughtered us by the billions, leaving our colonies scorched and uninhabitable. And now you dare to lecture us on decency? You commit unspeakable acts of destruction and demand we welcome you as equals." Chris's eyes narrowed, his voice unwavering. We have rules, General Yakrin. Rules of war. Rules of restraint. Rules that keep us from becoming the very monsters we fear. His words resonated with barely restrained anger. But these rules are for us. They bind us in conflicts among our own. They were never meant to apply to an alien force that struck us unprovoked. He took a step forward, his gaze boring into Yakrin's. You attacked Earth, and when we responded, we didn't do so half-heartedly. We fought back with everything we had, because we know our own darkness, and we don't take kindly to those who bring it out. But we stopped, out of choice, not necessity. If we hadn't, there wouldn't be a Skrullian left in this galaxy. The chamber was deathly still. Even Chancellor Boomer seemed to have lost his usual composure, his eyes wide as he watched the intensity on Chris's face. For a long, tense moment, the only sound was a faint hum of distant machinery. Yakrin's composure wavered as he felt the weight of Chris's words, and the human ambassador's gaze didn't soften in the slightest. Stooping down, Chris picked up the treaty from the floor and placed it back on the table, pushing it towards Yakrin. The choice is yours, General, he said, his voice low, yet as unyielding as stone. Sign it, or find out exactly why we keep our rules. A shudder ran through Yakrin's form as he reached for the pen with a shaking hand. The treaty was signed. Chris straightened, his duty in the chambers fulfilled. It seems my business here is concluded, he said, the icy calm in his tone unmistakable. He turned, leaving behind a room full of uneasy silence. As the heavy doors closed behind him, an air of relief swept over the assembly, each ambassador exchanging cautious glances. The tension of his presence lingered like a shadow, a reminder of the silent, deadly power now seated at their table. The assembly sat in a tense, collective silence as the treaty, a single document holding the galaxy's fragile hopes, was passed down the line of seated ambassadors. Eyes darted back and forth as the treaty made its way to each representative, marked by symbols from the home worlds of every major civilization present. The parchment, stamped with interwoven designs and set with seals, bore a weight that went beyond ink and paper. For each signatory, it represented an uneasy gamble on the future of humanity's place in the galaxy. At the head of the table, Chancellor Boomer watched the proceedings, his gaze steady and contemplative. The amphibious statesman had spent his life brokering peace across disputed star systems, but this moment tested his resolve. His calm, blue-toned face betrayed only a hint of his inner turmoil as he observed Lieutenant Commander Chris Anderson standing silent and unmoving beside the signing table, his stance as immovable as the treaty he had come to secure. Boomer's mind spun with concern. Binding humanity into the Union might prevent a future war, or it might open the door to something far more volatile. Please, Boomer's voice echoed gently, though it struggled against the tension in the room. Let us complete this process with the dignity and unity that the Union represents. As he spoke, the document moved to the representative from the Rallium Accord, a delicate-winged figure who hesitated briefly before signing with a trembling hand. The diplomat nodded tersely to Chris, clearly uncomfortable but resigned. When the treaty reached the hands of the Uxer Collective's ambassador, a stoic elder with skin that shimmered like polished stone, he took a long, solemn pause before lifting his gaze to meet Chris's. It is not without reluctance that we extend our hand to humanity, he murmured. But in these times, it is necessary. Chris held his stare, offering a slight, unreadable nod. The treaty eventually reached General Yakrin, whose presence alone filled the room with an air of hostile unease. The Skrullian leader leaned forward, his eyes glinting with simmering resentment as he regarded the document lying before him, bearing the signatures of his fellow dignitaries. His clawed hand hovered over the page, but then he recoiled, voice hissing with anger. You would bind us to a treaty with those who have brought ruin upon my people, he snarled, his voice a harsh, guttural sound that cut through the stillness. His scaled fingers curled into a fist as he addressed the assembly, his words laced with bitter defiance. Are we to forgive the razing of our nursery worlds, the slaughter of our young, simply because Earth now sits among us. Boonmer shifted, his expression unchanging but his gaze hardening as he addressed Yakrin. The past conflicts have been regrettable. He began diplomatically. But as we move forward, it is essential that each of us finds it within ourselves to embrace unity. Peace is not achieved by clinging to the wounds of the past. Yakrin's lips curled back in a snarl. Peace? Do you call the merciless annihilation of my people's future regrettable? Do you believe a single signature can erase the generations that will never live? His piercing amber eyes shifted to Chris, who met his gaze without flinching. You attacked Earth, Chris said, his tone firm, his voice low and cold. He made no elaborate speeches, only a simple statement of fact, but the restrained fury within his words seemed to resonate through the room. You attacked Earth and we responded. I am here to ensure humanity joins the Union, to ensure we have shared laws, but let there be no mistake. We will not forget, nor will we tolerate further aggression. Yakrin's expression twisted, his resentment giving way to a bitter realization. He looked down at the treaty as though it were a sentence he was being forced to accept, his pride and fury warring against the practical knowledge that his people could not endure another human retaliation. With a final, defiant growl, he dipped his pen in the ink and signed, his strokes harsh and reluctant. The document now bore the reluctant mark of the Skrullians. As the last ink dried, Boonmer breathed a subtle sigh of relief, though his gaze remained somber. It is done, he said softly, looking over the assembled representatives. With this signature, we move into a new era of cooperation. The air in the room shifted slightly, the collective sigh of relief almost audible as the weight of his decision settled over each ambassador. For a moment, a tentative hope took root in Boonmer's heart. Perhaps, in time, humanity's rough edges could be smoothed. Perhaps the Union could bring peace where blood had once been shed. Yet, as Boonmer glanced toward Chris, he could not shake a sense of foreboding. The human ambassador's gaze was intense, unreadable, as he regarded the newly signed treaty. There was no joy in his expression, no sense of triumph, only a resolute, quiet determination, as if he held secrets that the Union was not yet ready to understand. The Chancellor knew, then, that his work had only begun. The treaty might have bound humanity to the Union, but it was clear that humanity's heart remained unbound, wary of alliances and poised for any threat. With Chris as their representative, humanity's message was unmistakable. Peace was preferable, but they would not hesitate to defend their own, no matter the cost. As the ambassadors began to exchange tentative glances, still processing the weight of this new alliance, Boonmer felt a shiver of apprehension, a cold reminder that a document alone could not bind the fire that lay dormant within this newly allied species. And as he observed Chris, who was already gathering his things to leave, Boonmer could not shake the feeling that this treaty marked not an end to conflict, but merely the beginning of an uncertain, fragile peace. A silence, thick with unspoken tensions, settled over the assembly chambers. The treaty was signed, but the hard stares, clenched fists, and wary glances made it clear. Acceptance of the treaty had not erased old grievances. High General Yakrin sat rigid, his golden eyes flashing as he leaned forward, his voice slicing through the heavy quiet like a blade. This is a mockery, he spat, venom lacing every word. We have allowed these creatures to stand among us, to sign a treaty, yet they bring nothing but ruin. His gaze fixed on Chris, unblinking, as if daring the human ambassador to respond. You may fool the Union with promises and papers, but I know your kind. The Skrullians know what it is to suffer at human hands. The other ambassadors shifted uneasily, some casting wary glances at Chris, others at Yakrin. Chancellor Boonmer raised a hand, hoping to quell the outburst, but Yakrin's bitterness was beyond restraint. Let's recount the toll of human peace, shall we? Yakrin's words spilled out, scorn sharpening his tone. We lost entire generations. Nursery planets raised to rubble, our future left in ashes. And why? Because we dared to strike before you did. We protected ourselves against what we knew you would bring. Conquest, war, devastation. Chris watched him with an unwavering gaze, his silence more unsettling than any words he could have spoken. Yakrin leaned closer, his expression darkening. Humans cry about justice and rules, but there is no honor in your history. You boast about these rules of war, as if that absolves your savagery. You flaunt your self-restraint. Yet, where was it when you obliterated entire worlds? When you murdered our young? The venom in his voice echoed through the chamber, leaving the gathered representatives visibly uncomfortable. But Chris's expression didn't change. He seemed almost eerily calm, unruffled by the accusations. When he finally spoke, his words were quiet, yet they carried a weight that silenced the assembly. You attacked Earth. Those 3 words hung in the air, as cold and unyielding as the man who spoke them. Chris's tone was devoid of emotion, yet it conveyed something deeper, a buried rage, a history of pain and unity forged in the fires of survival. He took a step forward, each footfall deliberate, his gaze fixed on Yakrin. We extended our hand in peace, he continued, his voice a measured calm that belied the anger simmering beneath the surface. When humanity first ventured into the stars, we sought cooperation, trade, understanding. He paused, his eyes narrowing. And when we encountered the Skrullians, our first instinct was to communicate, to build bridges. But you met us with violence. Yakrin scoffed, yet there was a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. Chris's eyes bore into him, unwavering. Your attack on Earth changed everything. We were a fractured species, divided by borders and ideologies. But when you struck, we united. Your invasion made us one. For the first time, humanity had a common enemy, and all our divisions, all our petty conflicts disappeared. The chamber was silent, the tension so palpable it felt like a physical presence. Chris's gaze was relentless, pinning Yakrin in place, making even the proud Skrullian general falter. Chris's voice dropped, hardening. We developed rules of war to protect ourselves from our worst instincts. Our history is soaked in blood. We have committed atrocities against our own, enslaved, tortured, annihilated entire cultures. Those rules, they exist to prevent us from repeating that cycle of destruction. He straightened, his voice rising just enough to fill the chamber without shouting. But those rules were made for human wars, human enemies. They were not designed to protect alien aggressors who would dare assault our homeworld. His gaze sharpened, piercing Yakrin. You invited a response, General. We showed you exactly why those rules are necessary. For us, without them, we are a force of destruction that cannot be contained. And you experienced just a glimpse of that force. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. Some of the alien representatives shifted uncomfortably. Others looked away, their gazes heavy with the realization of humanity's potential for wrath. The words hung between them, a stark reminder that humanity was unlike any other species present. To them, peace was not an inherent condition but a choice that could be revoked. Yakrin, visibly shaken but determined to hold his ground, pointed a clawed finger at Chris. You think this justifies your actions? You believe your barbaric history excuses the genocide of my people's future. Chris's jaw tightened, a flicker of restrained anger crossing his face. We are not proud of what happened, but we made it clear, attack Earth, and there will be consequences. Our survival is not negotiable. Yakrin fell silent, his fury tempered by the reality of what had unfolded. The assembled ambassadors shifted, exchanging uncertain glances. The treaty lay on the table, a fragile promise that could as easily break as hold. For a moment, the room was filled with the weight of understanding. Humanity's entry into the Union had changed the balance. The Union had averted a war by signing that document, but they had also bound themselves to a people who could, if provoked, unleash a devastating force. Chris took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the assembly, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. The treaty binds us to rules we intend to respect. But never forget why those rules exist. His eyes met Yakrin's one last time. "We are bound by this agreement now, General. But remember, you attacked us first." Yakrin looked away, his silence signaling a reluctant acknowledgement. Chancellor Boonmer, watching the scene unfold, felt the full weight of his decision to bring humanity into the Union. He understood now that humanity's presence was both a shield and a threat, a force that could protect or destroy. The tension finally ebbed as Chris straightened, his expression unreadable. The message was clear. Humanity had joined the Union, but they would not be subdued. The Union's fragile peace had been preserved for now, yet every representative knew the same truth. The humans were not to be crossed. The doors to the assembly chambers slid shut behind Lieutenant Commander Chris Anderson, the sound echoing faintly in the stillness of the room. Inside, the remaining representatives sat in uneasy silence, each processing the heavy conversation that had unfolded. For all the confidence that the Union of Civilizations had projected in bringing humanity into the fold, the truth was now clear. Earth was no ordinary species, and its potential was as dangerous as it was vast. Chancellor Boonmer was the first to speak, his voice strained but resolute. "We have averted an open conflict for now," he said, his eyes flicking to the others around the table. "But do not underestimate the implications of today's events. We have accepted a species unlike any other into our ranks." A murmur of agreement passed among the ambassadors, though there was no joy in their voices. The Skrullian General Yakrin had signed the treaty, but the bitterness in his eyes remained. His expression still twisted in anger, and he was silent now. But that silence was the quiet of someone who had lost, not of someone who had accepted the outcome. Boomer turned toward the general, his gaze piercing. "Yakrin, you remain unsettled, but humanity has proven itself capable of the unimaginable. If we intend to keep the peace, we must recognize their strength and their history." Yakrin's tail lashed irritably, a sign of his barely contained frustration. "Strength," he hissed. "This is not strength, Chancellor. This is a danger that should never have been unleashed. The Terrans are a volatile species, and what we witness today is only the beginning. They destroyed my people's future, our nursery worlds. That is not strength. That is madness." Chris's words lingered in Yakrin's mind. "You attacked Earth first," the human had said, his voice chilling in its finality. It had been the singular, unrelenting truth that no one could deny. But the Skrullians had not seen it that way. They had seen humanity as just another species to dominate, to either conquer or control. They had never expected to face the kind of retaliation Earth had delivered. As the conversation turned in muted whispers around the room, the weight of the Union's decision began to settle in. One by one, the ambassadors turned their attention to Boonmer, who had assumed the role of mediator and now stood as the reluctant leader of this new, delicate arrangement. "The Skrullians are not wrong in their caution," Boonmer admitted, his voice softened with wisdom. "Humanity's history, their anger, is something we cannot ignore. But we must also face the truth. They have united under a banner of defense, and in that unity lies a power none of us fully understand. They have made their mark, and the galaxy will have to adapt." The room fell silent again. The other delegates had their own opinions, but no one dared speak them aloud just yet. Everyone understood the gravity of the situation. Earth's might was undeniable now, and that strength had shifted the dynamics of the Union. There was no going back, no more comforting illusions about humanity's place in the galaxy. Far from the assembly chambers, Chris stood on a balcony overlooking Djoser Prime's sprawling cityscape. The endless rows of gleaming towers and starships made the bustling metropolis seem almost otherworldly. But even here, amid the artificial beauty, Chris's mind was elsewhere, back on Earth, where a different kind of war was being waged. The war for survival had never really ended. It had simply taken on a new form. A message blinked on his wristband. Earth Military Command. He tapped the notification, his face hardening as he read the brief. Status update. The Union has accepted the treaty, but Command is on high alert. Earth will abide by the laws. but remain prepared for any eventuality. Keep us informed." Chris didn't respond immediately. He was thinking of Earth's future, of what had just happened, and more importantly, of what was yet to come. The treaty, the fragile peace, had been achieved not through diplomacy alone, but through sheer force of will, the will of a unified humanity determined to never again face the threat of annihilation. In the distance, the sun set over Djoser Prime, casting long shadows over the city. Chris's thoughts turned inward. The Union may have accepted humanity into its ranks, but that acceptance had come at a price no one in the galaxy would forget. And the Union, for all its sophistication and knowledge, had underestimated one crucial factor: humanity's resilience. Behind the scenes, Earth's leaders were already making preparations. The treaty was merely a step, a temporary measure. Humanity had its own plans. The Union's resources, its knowledge, would be valuable, yes, but they were also a means to an end. Humanity had not entered the Union for mere survival. They had entered it to grow, to learn, to build alliances, and to secure their place among the stars. No one would ever attack Earth again. As Chris rejoined the rest of the human delegation, he spoke in a voice that carried the authority of someone who had seen too much, too many wars, too much destruction. "Make no mistake," he said, his gaze sweeping across the group. "We've been given a seat at the table, but it's not out of kindness. The galaxy will never be the same. We need to use every advantage we can get. Earth may have made an enemy today, but we have also made our first step into a much larger world." Back in the assembly chambers, the ambassadors were already planning their next moves, privately discussing what they had witnessed and what it meant for the Union. Some questioned the wisdom of bringing humanity into the fold, while others saw an opportunity to tame the beast they had invited. But Chris knew the truth. The Union would bend to humanity's will, or it would break. The galaxy would soon learn. When you attack Earth, you awaken something far greater than you can ever hope to control. And humanity had just begun.